Hello, I'm Steve McMillan. I'm the Sheldon and Marjorie Fountain Professor of Evangelism and Mission at Acadia Divinity College. I also served for 27 years as a pastor, and as a sociologist, I've been doing a lot of research over the last number of years that looks in the way in which digital media is affecting congregations. And so in this session, I'm going to be talking about carrying out the mission in a digital age. Think about what that means for us today in a world that has changed a great deal because of digital media. Social life in Canada has changed drastically in a very short time because of digital media. So how can churches be effective in witness in such a digital age? We're going to look at hopefully understanding some things and then think about some practical things that we can do as well. So first of all, let's try to think about what really has changed in our society. At first, I think with the introduction of digital media, many Christians thought that the internet would speed up communication and help us to share the gospel more widely. I think we're now realizing that digital media change much more than just those things in our world. We enjoy many of the changes that the digital world has brought. Who wants to go back to changing typewriter ribbons and preparing church bulletins on mimeograph stencils? And I realize that those of you who are younger than 45 don't even know what I'm talking about. The internet has allowed us to cross boundaries, boundaries of geography and ethnicity and language. We are much more aware of the world around us, the diversity of our world. I think another very positive thing about the digital age is that marginalized people have a voice that often they did not have before, that they can make their voice heard, even if people in power and influence do not really want them to have that voice. So I think that's a positive thing. At the same time, though, digital media have resulted in a world that is much more individualistic, more consumer-driven, more performance-oriented, more distracted, and more unkind, I think. Extreme views and bullying and spiritual abuse are fueled by social media's ability to send unfiltered content directly into everyone's home, right onto our laptops. Big data, as it's called, is collecting information about us. Well, even as you're watching this video, big data collects information about us from our devices and then sells it so that we can be skillfully targeted for consumer products like never before. And that's why we are bombarded today with Christian consumer products as well as everything else that they're trying to sell to us. So what has changed with the digital age? Well, all of those things have changed the way in which we live. People spend way more time in front of a screen in our 24/7, always on world. Sociologists have been watching for more than 20 years now as society becomes less social. Even while we add multitudes of social media friends, if we are social, it is as likely to be online as it is in person. But relating to people online, what people call intimacy at a distance, is not the same as face-to-face conversation with a good friend, or for that matter, same as face-to-face worship or face-to-face ways in which we share the good news. As I'm recording this video, of course, we are all social distancing from one another because of COVID-19, and we are very, very thankful. I'm very thankful for the media that allows us to connect online for worship and for community and for Jesus to the nations. I just today participated in Acadia Divinity College's weekly, now online, chapel service. And we are so thankful as a seminary community that we can still connect with one another because of the media. It is an amazing, encouraging, inspiring time of worship. But no one thinks it's better than being in the same room together. We are longing for the day when we are worshiping together in person once again. What has not changed in this digital age is that as humans, we are social beings. God created us for relationships with Him and with others. At the heart of the gospel is the promise that through Jesus, our broken relationship with God will be restored. That being restored in relationship with God will lead to restored relationships with others. not because our communication is now better, or not because our communication is faster, but because our sin problem has been dealt with. And that's the real problem in terms of our society. And it's not enough. It is not enough that today we can proclaim the gospel faster and to more people digitally. That is not enough. We may very well be able to use new media to communicate the gospel message clearly, but it will never replace the importance of godly love for other people. It will never replace the importance of Christian community as essential to our witness, because our love for one another and our unity, our oneness in Christ, are, according to the words of Jesus in John 13 and in John 17, absolutely essential to our witness. When Paul the Apostle reminded the Thessalonians of his time with them when they had become followers of Jesus, he said that he and his companions did not just share the message, they shared their lives. That sharing of our lives is essential to the gospel. One of the biggest changes, I think, for traditional congregations is that space and place have different meaning than they used to, and that includes sacred spaces. So for people, perhaps older people, people my age, people who grew up in a church building with stained glass and with pews and beautiful woodwork and a handmade, handcrafted pulpit and religious symbols around the building. For those people, a worship space like that invites reflection. It invites otherworldly thoughts of hope and of peace and of godliness. For a digital generation, such a space invites utter boredom and thoughts of irrelevancy. For a digital generation, they would ask, why would you have these same traditional symbols on the wall every week when a host of new and meaningful and contextually relevant symbols can be projected and shared in new ways that connect with the message and with the worship each week, and that relate to the digital world in which most people are increasingly immersed? That's hard for many traditional people and people who think in traditional ways about their Christian faith and their Christian community. In a digital world, and this is, I think, the biggest problem for us in churches when it comes to digital media and our witness. In a digital world, well-edited performance can too often replace authentic worship and authentic community. And that makes authenticity all the more important. We need to be real in our churches. We need to allow people in our churches to be real, to be themselves, to be open about ways in which God is working in their lives. But in a world of manufactured online profiles that we don't know if they're true or not, in a world of digitally mediated friendships, in a world of individualism, things like true friendship and community, both online and in person, are more important than ever. And certainly they are more important for our Christian witness. Friendship that is inauthentic cripples the witness of any church. And if our online presence is inauthentic, then it will hinder the gospel, no matter how amazing our website is or how amazing our social media appears. So, one of my first questions for you would simply be this, very practically. Does your congregation's website authentically portray your congregation? I have visited many congregations in the United States and Canada over the past few years doing research. And I've seen websites with beautiful stock photos of happy young families and exuberant worship. Everyone looks like they're singing their hearts out with their hands raised in the air. But when I arrive at the church, I find mostly a group of grumpy seniors and singing that's right out of the 1970s. That is inauthentic. People expect that what we say in media will reflect the reality of who we are and what God is doing in our midst. A second question would be whether media is uniting or dividing the church from the surrounding community. Social media can be very us-centered when it's used by congregations. And when we do that, we divide the church between those who are inside and those who are outside. Social media could be used to invite people outside the church to begin to experience the church community before they ever enter the door. But too often we don't do that. If your website or your Facebook site is an online version of the church bulletin, then you're probably placing an additional barrier between the church and your neighbors. But if it is an inclusive way of sharing the good news, if your website actually shares a message, it can break down barriers and welcome people so that when they first come in person, they already feel a bit like insiders. So are you sharing your community? Or are you just sharing announcements? Are you sharing a message? Or are you sharing your financial needs? Think about how media is used in ways that could help the community around your church feel that they would be welcome. In fact, that they could be insiders when they come and join you. Another question that I would ask would be if media is being used to unite or divide the congregation, especially along generational lines. Here's a truth that some churches seem to have chosen to ignore. There are hundreds of thousands of seniors in Atlantic Canada who need to hear the gospel, who need to know Jesus. Yet some churches are so focused on their, future survival, perhaps especially their financial survival, that they are solely focused on reaching younger people. They want more young people to come into their churches so they will give more, so they will volunteer more, so the ministries will continue. Now, we need to reach young families with the gospel. We need to reach youth and children. We need to reach young adults, no question. In fact, we need to reach far more of those younger people than we are reaching now. We need to be more effective in our witness, more effective in evangelism, more focused. But the truth is, we need to reach baby boomers, we need to reach seniors, we need to reach all age groups. Media needs to be used wisely so that we are effective in reaching all generations. And not because it's good for the future of the church, but because we love our communities. We love people who are elderly, we love people who are teenagers, we love young families, we love middle-aged people. And for all of them, we want them to know Jesus. We want them to hear the gospel. We want to be witnesses to them effectively so that they will come to the faith that we have come to know. Let me give you an example of a way that this can be done through media in a very positive way. So I would say that as I've done research in local congregations throughout North America, I hear over and over that churches are failing at this. When I survey people in communities, they will tell me that the way that media is used is causing a gap really between seniors and younger people. And yet I was in one congregation in Maine, and I was leading a focus group of young adults. I had 10 young adults in a focus group. And when they came to the question of how media was affecting the generations in the church, one young man, a university student, spoke up and said, he said, the use of media in our church has made me feel so much closer to the seniors in our congregation. It's made such a difference in bringing everyone of different generations together. Well, I hadn't heard that much in congregations, so I wanted to find out what had happened. And this is the story that he told me. He said that their pastor had decided to preach a sermon series, and he had gone to the young adults in the congregation, those that were really adept at using media, and he asked them to go to the homes of people who were so elderly, church members who were so elderly that they were not able to get out to church anymore. And he asked them to go and to record from them their thoughts about the theme of the sermon. And there was a whole series. So each week, another person in their late 80s or 90s who was never able to get out to church shared a testimony, shared their thoughts about the theme of the sermon that week. And so these young adults met elderly people, members of the church that they had never met before. And they heard from them in meeting them how deep their faith was. And it became such a powerful encouragement. Then they brought that media back. It was shown on the Sunday right before the pastor's message. And in the church service, the seniors who were there were saying, those are our friends that can't get out to church anymore. This is wonderful what the young adults are doing by using media. And so here's this relatively small church that has a media lab now with all of the equipment they could possibly want. And they said, well, all the seniors have provided the money for that because they were so excited at what we did to bring the generations together through that project that the pastor had thought of. I wonder how many times we think about media and how it might be used, again, to give voice to the voiceless, to the marginalized. Now, that was what happened in that congregation as these elderly people, no longer able to get out to church, were able to have a voice. And suddenly these young adults realized these are mentors. These are people of great faith that we can learn from, and the generations in the church came together. How much you do something like that in your church that would use media to bring generations together? Let me challenge you in another way about the use of media. So I went to a church in the Midwestern United States. They had actually an amazing website, probably the best website I've ever seen for a church. So that was what actually attracted me to go to that church. But when I met with the pastor on Saturday to do an interview, he told me something that really shocked me. He said, we are a no-screen church. He said, we have no screens in our service. And in fact, he said, when people come in the door, they check their cell phones. We don't allow cell phones in the service. And so I'm thinking, oh dear, this isn't what I was expecting, but I'd already agreed to come the next day and lead a focus group. So I was expecting to see an elderly group of people in this no-screen church. I was wrong. I went to church the next day and I discovered a church where I was one of the oldest people there because almost everyone was in their 20s and 30s. This pastor and the small group of people around him, as they were really replanting a church in the downtown of their city, they looked around and they said, we can't do media like the big mega churches can do. But they said, we can reach out to the people who live around us here in the downtown of the city who work in media day in and day out. And so they had a block away from their church building, they had the world headquarters of a major US airline. In another direction, about 2 blocks away, they had a large research university. And they decided there are people there that are sick of media, young adults. So that's what they targeted. That's who they decided to be witnesses to. And so they invited those people to come. And here were people who had not been going to church anywhere before, who were coming to this church because it had no screens. Now, this is not a church that was against media. All the people in the church worked in media, really. But they needed a break from their always-on workplace. They needed to be able to tell their boss, you can't reach me on Sunday morning because I have to check my cell phone so that I can worship. Again, I just thought that was a creative way to realize how to reach out in new ways. So really, that's my challenge to you, is to think about media, not in terms of how fast it is or how glitzy it is or how exciting it is, but to realize that we need to use media in a way that allows us to be authentic in our witness, that does not decrease our concern, our love for people. We need to use media in a way that makes the message remain clear, that allows us to be the community that cares about other people. Media is not just about what we present. Media is about who we are, how we relate to one another, and how we help other people to get to know Jesus. I hope this has been helpful. I'm Steve McMullen from Acadia Divinity College. Thanks for being with me and listening.